Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. Our guest this evening is Daniel Cooper. He has been to Hinterschmid-Rudy. He's met with Billy. He's talked with Billy at length. When he was in Switzerland, I believe last time, he saw a spacecraft that Billy identified as a group of people called the Druans, which are human E.T.s from the NOL system, which is about 3.1 million light years from Earth. And these Druan ships have been appearing in the skies of Earth without any kind of cloaking. Back in Contact 311, Billy discusses these ships being seen in 2001 by a fellow named Freddie Kropp. And I guess the High Council is involved in this decision to make these ships visible to certain people at certain times. So this is kind of an interesting phenomena that's going on. The other thing that I want to discuss with Daniel this evening is before he discovered the Meier case, he developed what you might call a framework for ET contact. So he already had a criteria that he was looking at to evaluate whether a potential ET contact would be real or not. So anyway, we will discuss these two things tonight. I'll bring Daniel back on the show. Daniel, how are you this evening?
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good myself. And I've been going through your framework here, and it's very interesting. You talk about people that you were in contact with. I guess your family and friends were quite religious and materialistic in ways, and it made it difficult for you to have conversations with them about this topic. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that here at the beginning of the show?
Yeah, sure. I guess there's just one little thing I wanted to get off the plate from last time, I guess when we were talking about the Druan ships. That's before we move on to the next topic. Marianne Erlinger actually reminded me, I just kind of took it for granted in the conversation, but that the ships actually project themselves at a distance away from their ship so that it sort of deflects the light and everything, the image of their ship, so that they can keep working, and if the military wants to chase the lights around the sky, they can do whatever they want. So that was a little detail that I wanted to clarify from the last interview. But I guess with the rest of it though, with the calculations, it did certainly start that way, and it's really hard to tell when it really got started, but it certainly progressed as I grew up as a teenager and so forth, and I was done by the age of 16 there. So, but yes, I was fairly on my own there at the time, and nobody to talk to about this stuff at all, and it was just one very basic observation after another, and I didn't have internet at the time to research anything, and I didn't enjoy reading all that much, so it was all mostly just from practical experience. So very basic conversations, everyone, as I said last time, can check if Switzerland is politically neutral, and when the first personal computer came out, and all that kind of stuff, and when Future Shop existed, and when it didn't, and all that, So it's nothing secret about it, and but it certainly was difficult at the time because I was completely on my own, and there was nobody I could talk to about it, and it was all theoretical on my part anyways at the time, so it wasn't something I would have ever felt comfortable talking about. I even thought, even after I found it, I didn't think there would be any, after I found the case, I mean, I wouldn't think there would be any real reason to go into this because it already served its purpose for me, so... But as I was having conversations even with people in Figu, I realized that even though it's very simple, it seems to put things into context for people, and so that's interesting. I never thought it would actually be useful for anyone. So it's kind of funny how things progress.
Well, I think it's real useful because it kind of lets us know how perfectly planned the whole Meier case, the whole Meier contact was. It wasn't random. It wasn't something that just happened by chance. But every last detail of it was planned. When it was going to occur and where it was going to occur, and you. The amazing thing about this to me is that you foresaw pretty much all of this. Which shows
interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
Shows an incredible discernment, I think.
Well, I can say I was lucky, maybe. I don't know. I don't know what happened there, but whenever I looked at a lot of ideologies and religions and whatever philosophies and stuff, there was always just some big part of it that didn't make sense, and I was like, man, that just doesn't work for me. I need something a lot more basic to get through all of this stuff, a framework that can actually be simple enough and high probability enough to just break through all that. And so that's what I needed, and that's what I built. So, and yeah, it worked. So simplicity is very, very much underrated in our world. People are people are so into trying to make things complex because it makes them sound intelligent. I just went the other way. I said, screw that. It just confuses people. You can't have conversation anymore with people because everyone's on their own tangent and so disconnected from one reality or another, and it's all, it just can't work eventually. And so you have to stick to the simple stuff. And I find that with music and art and everything else that I've ever tried and really worked hard at, stick to the simple stuff. Simple, and never get away from that. Because if you get away from what you understand, then you don't understand what you're doing anymore, and you can't build from there anymore. You know what I mean? So it's you have to stick to very basic things, and then you can build. That's a foundation, right? So
it's really interesting that you call this simple because the word simple is not what I would have used to describe what you've done here. It's just incredibly insightful, I think. One of the interesting things you talk about is what you call expert witnesses in the UFO circus, which work for counterintelligence or military-related agencies.
Yeah.
So
you seem to see
tell
a lot
me
about
that.
Yeah, well, whenever you go to these UFO conferences like the one I went to, or, you hear about them, you watch them on YouTube, you find books in the stores and stuff like that, it's always this ex-military guy or this ex-CIA guy who's retired or whatever, all this kind of stuff. Like, yeah, okay, great. These guys are talking about this stuff, and I'm sorry, but, they're probably under some sort of a gag order. They're not allowed to talk about things willy-nilly, even after they retire. We've heard about people who get assassinated for letting out secrets after they retire, or whatever, So there's just certain things you can't do, and it just seems too much like the stuff that they were talking about. There's just so little evidence, and it's always these stories, and they might be true, but still, it's so lacking in physical evidence compared to the Meier case. I mean, geez, I just looked the other way. I just what's the point of this? It just seemed to me like there were way too many interests at stake for them to be so willy-nilly about a big subject like this. Like, this is at the forefront of the edge of our civilization, so to speak, you know? And if we start actually properly acknowledging that there are other civilizations out there and they're visiting us and all this kind of stuff, well, I'm sorry, but, you know, if that really was provable, in the sense that, you know, like, I don't know, it's hard to put into words, but I mean, like, the Meier case is provable, obviously, but it's so hidden, obviously, and there's so much disinformation surrounding it, and so on and so forth too. So it just makes it very difficult for people to get to. But that's the whole purpose, I found, of the UFO circus, so to speak. So was to keep people away from this, because it was, I don't know, it's just challenging so much that we take for granted, you know, and on our world, about so many things that at the core, you know, of what we take in our world as knowledge, and about religions, and about, you know, faith in governments and all this kind of stuff, which is quite low at this point, I guess, in many places. But still, you know, governments want to keep some air of authority or whatever, you know, some credibility. So, but it just seems to, everything about this case sort of works against that, and you know, against the people that are trying to keep control. So, because it's not about trying to keep control for a few people, it's about democratizing high-level knowledge for everybody to use, because that's the thing that's going to be the most useful in filling the gap between the low, poor educated classes and the highly educated rich classes, you know? I mean, no longer anymore do we need these really super expensive universities that only a few people can afford to get into. I mean, yeah, I see their point in some respects, but today with the internet, there's a lot that you can find out on your own. Like, I can just go on YouTube and find out all kinds of stuff about how to do things with music and all this sort of thing. Like, 15 years ago, I couldn't do that. You know, I would have to go to a university course and pay, you know, $10,000 a semester or whatever it might be. You know, and that's pretty cheap by today's standards, if you're going to the really, really pricey universities. So, you know, some kid in Nigeria can't benefit from that at all. And so this this inequality just gets worse and worse. And but thanks to the internet now, and thanks to people like the Ptaah and so on, who are bringing this information forward in a way that can be spread beyond the reach of governments and all this kind of stuff through the internet, you know, having done it in the time that they did, starting in 1975, it just, the information is much more useful and much more graspable from anybody's point of view. So you got kids, again, in Nigeria who can read this stuff on their phone, you know, or whatever it might be they have. It seems like they kind of leapfrogged over the whole telephone pole, you know, with power lines and all that stuff thing, and just went straight to cell phones. So I think Africa has the highest cell phone usage in the world or something. So, but you know, you see all these things, and it's just, yeah, it's useful, very, very useful for closing that gap. And that's sort of, I think, the main purpose right now is to create peace on this world before we blast out into space and start meeting less advanced civilizations and screwing up their entire, you know, world, or even, like, of course, like what we did with the Native Indians, the Native Americans, and the Mayans and all that stuff, and also looking at more advanced civilizations than us, who wouldn't put up with our barbarity and our stupidity and our volatility and our ignorance. And they would just say, screw you guys, we're just going to take over your planet and enslave you, and to hell with you. So there's a lot of good reasons why we need to grow up as a civilization very fast if we want to go out there, which is very much in the cards now. We're getting to that point. So talking about building bases on Mars and all kinds of stuff like that, well, you know, I'm sorry, we have to grow up. So
do you think that the UFO groups like MUFON are intentionally directing folks away from the Meier case?
I don't know about, like, seen, of course, Michael Horn, trying to get those people to look into the Meier case and so on. And I guess I read a bit about their history and so on. I never knew any of them by name. I just realized that the UFO sort of mainstream UFO whatever circus is certainly geared towards very low substance cases and very low level information that really doesn't help anybody in any way in our social structures. And they're always talking about, technology this, technology that, if we could just have the technology. I'm sorry. You know what? We've had the atom bomb and we've used it on people, and that didn't go very well, and we don't need that right now. What we need is to grow up. We need to grow the hell up really fast, and so that we stop using weapons against each other. And how much money the U.S. alone spends on their military every year. It's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars per year. That's not necessary. And the first thing they would do is take over that technology, and guess what? They would use it against somebody. Well, yeah, that's what we see today going on in every single country. So I'm sorry, that's the last thing we need, And I would be very, very, very surprised if any alien civilization would take any interest at all in giving us any technology like that. They would not, because we would be a direct threat to them, too. What the hell's the point? I mean, can people not see how illogical that sounds? Like, you just have to watch the news for 10 seconds before you realize, no, those people need to grow up. They need to introspect a little bit before they keep working on their technology, especially technologies that would embolden their militaries. So the internet was a useful technology, and it's a double-edged sword, yeah, but today's not the information age anymore. It's the age of information recommendation. So now we need to start thinking about this information, what it actually means, and deciphering it. And so for me, this framework became very useful in that respect. So, and I knew that would be a big problem, information overload today, especially with all of the different power groups trying to claim power over this or that or whatever it might be. And I just thought, man, the amount of disinformation out there is just so ridiculously high these days, and it's just so useless. And so, yeah, I just needed to get away from that and get through it and get on to the other side, so to speak, build a bridge over the chasm, so to speak. So
you talk about inequality as being a problem, which I find that really interesting. I think that's very perceptive. I always thought it was interesting, for example, that some of the televangelists have private jets and they make tens of millions of dollars.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Could you please comment on that?
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, you just, what more needs to be said, right? Like, these people are asking for money. You've seen all the YouTube videos of the guys getting on their knees and all that stuff on TV, and give me $1,000, whatever it might be, or whatever, even if you're broke, it doesn't matter, and all this kind of stuff, and God will repay you and all this sort of thing. And of course it never happens, but I don't know. Yeah, I mean, what more needs to be said, right? Like, it's all these ancient texts and so on and so forth that are being used against people. A lot of Christians and so on and so forth kind of read between the lines and look for the good in the message, but it certainly has been misused as well, and it would be nice to get past that point for sure. Yeah. You see a lot of that in Africa and so on too, with the Catholic bishops and so on saying that, not to use condoms and all this kind of stuff, and with the AIDS proliferation there, I mean, my goodness, why on earth, and the overpopulation, and of course just contributes to the problems that they already have. Why? I mean, it's just so ridiculous. So even a little bit of education goes a long way.
So according to your framework, what was the most probable time and location for the first ET contacts?
Well, it ended up being 1975 in Switzerland, and I mean, do you want to go through all the details, the basic details about that again, or?
Sure, please.
We can certainly go through that. Yeah, sure. Yeah, well, of course, if you're looking for something like this, and if it's undertaken by intelligent people who've seen other civilizations develop, which they would have, certainly, if they're very seasoned travelers in that sense, and so on and so forth, they would be able to look at our technological and social spheres as well as our geographical points, and seeing what's going on in our world and so on, and be able to figure out, what would be the most useful, maybe long-term time to do this, the most strategic time. And so the first thing I said to myself, well, what would they look for in the location? Well, you look at Switzerland, it's politically neutral, which is a very good start. It's sort of central on the globe. So if you're going from Australia or from Canada to Europe, it's a lot easier than a Canadian going to Australia, or vice versa. Both world wars happened in Europe, and that's not such a coincidence if you look at the geographic location between East and West. And so, of course, the Southern Hemisphere has always been way too much in turmoil, apart from Australia, which is, like I said, way too far away for anything. So it takes me like 24 hours to get there by plane. That's not really useful. Whereas it only takes 9 hours to get to Switzerland, and it would be the same for an Australian. But you look at Africa, you look at South America, and there's so much poverty and so much corruption, in the sense that nothing functions as a government and nothing functions as countries really well, not long term anyways. And there's just so much volatility and ups and downs, and there's very little stability in any sense. So Europe was certainly a lot more stable, especially Switzerland. And you look at their ability to, the nation as a whole, the people generally have a very good education. They can all read and write, which is a very useful thing to have, of course, and there's a lot of scientific literacy. Einstein spent a good part of his life in Switzerland. They have the Big Hadron Collider there, which is the biggest physics machine in the world. Might be surpassed by China. I forgot to check up on that, but I know China was talking about building a bigger one now. I'm not sure if they've done it yet or not, but I guess it'll take time. And so on and so forth. So, I mean, of course, America was way too militarily involved in all over the world to be politically neutral. And they spend way too much money on their military, and they're always invading countries, and on and on and on and on. They have very little concern, I guess, for other countries' welfare, it seems, based on their results. And Switzerland is also controlling a lot of the wealth of these let's say, dictators and so on and so forth around the world. So they have very little interest in attacking Switzerland. Even Hitler didn't want to attack Switzerland. And I suppose that would have had some play in that. A lot of these people were holding their wealth there. And also everyone in Switzerland, all the men have to join the military for 1 or 2 years. So I think he had very little interest in wanting to invade Switzerland, which ended up being the case. He didn't go there, even though they were right next door. So yeah, that was a lot of points point to Switzerland. Patrick Chenot also pointed out that the German language plays a big part in that as well, with the way that the German language is structured, the way that it can be used, unlike other languages, which is a very, very useful point that he added into the calculation. Because I guess in German you're not really so much dependent on context, whereas in English you are. So words in German can be put together in a way that is much more precise, and it can be understood by any German speaker, any person who's learning or who's mastered German. Even if there's a very new meaning, and that's very important for the spirit teaching, of course, because it is a new teaching. There is nothing else like it around the world. And so there are certain topics that, if you don't have a history of having that in your language and being used in a certain context, then what do you do? So the German language really prevents certain falsifications from being able to occur in the future, which is very useful. So anyways, and so on and so forth. So it's just every point pointed to Switzerland for me, and I realized that, even if Germany has that location advantage, it's certainly not politically neutral either with their history and so on and so forth. France has had a lot of issues, of course, with going to wars in many different countries and so on too over the hundreds of years and so on and on and on. So it just more and more points pointed to Switzerland, and for the timing it was all about computer age and trying to figure out when the personal computer age really started. And I was watching George Lucas videos when I was young. I was really into Star Wars, and he brought out the special editions when I was in grade 6, I guess. I watched Star Wars for the first time in the theater there when he brought out the old movies again, and he redeveloped them with computer technology, right?
Yeah, Daniel, are you saying that these contacts had to occur at the time when personal computers were just coming out?
Yeah.
Is that a point you're trying to make?
That's the point I'm trying to make, yeah. So, sorry, I'm just kind of rolling a little quickly.
Why is that?
Well, that's the thing. His explanations, when I got the VHS tapes, the special editions, he would talk for about 15 minutes before each movie started. And he would outline every point about what they could not do in the 70s and 80s, even with the biggest film budgets ever spent at that time. So they were record breakers.
You say he. Who is he?
George Lucas.
Okay, George Lucas. Okay.
Sorry. Yeah. So, and so the creator of Star Wars. So when he was explaining what was and what was not possible to do in the 70s and 80s, and what was now possible to do with bleeding edge computer graphics in the mid 1990s, which cost millions of dollars to produce still at that time. And it still just looked like video games at that time too. I mean, like today's video games, even look better than some of the things that he did in the mid 1990s on those actual movies. So he was explaining very, very clearly what you cannot do with film photography, with film videos and so on versus digital photography and so forth, and Photoshop. So the people that had computers at the time when Meier brought his pictures to light in the 1970s, mid 1970s, starting in 1975. Those were all done with film photography. You could not do them with Photoshop. There was no Photoshop then. It didn't exist for another, 10 or 15 years. So, was it 25 years? So, anyway, long time.
Are you saying there's no way in the early 70s, the middle 70s, that they could have faked the films and or the photographs? There was no technology to do that.
Well, based on the tests that we're seeing coming out more and more today via, for example, Chris Locke and Raoul Zhao. How do you spell his name or pronounce his name? Raoul Zhao?
That was pretty close.
Okay. And the things that anybody now can reproduce, the same kinds of tests that they can reproduce at home now, based on, what these guys are demonstrating. There's, based on what we're seeing on those, no, there is no way that certain of these things could be done. If it was a fake case, if it was models or, that sort of thing. So it's very easy to tell, and it was even very easy to tell back in the 70s with the first Contact movie that came out. when they were still doing their research with the big government labs and the big all the research technology that they had at their disposal through different universities and through different laboratories here and there and so on that were connected with defense industry contracts and all that kind of stuff. The only people that had computers back then were people with those connections. And so, but they still would not be able to produce this stuff, but they were able to analyze it. And that's sort of the clincher right there. And so they were able to determine the size of the craft and all this kind of stuff based on the pixels on the sides of the edges of the objects and so on, as maybe you've seen in the contact video. But they spell it out right there. I mean, you don't even, if you want to take it further, you can go way further. You can take it as far as you like. So we can do way more intricate tests now than we could then. And everyone has computers today, so it makes a big difference. Sorry, go ahead.
How old were you when you discovered the Meier case? Do you remember?
It was in 2008. I'm bad with age. Every time somebody asks my age, I always have to look at my wife for a second. I'm 31 now. I discovered it in 2008 in December. And I don't know how old I would have been then, but I finished the calculations in around the year 2000. And when I was 16.
You were in your early 20s, late teens, something like that?
Early 20s. Yeah, I think I was 23 at the time.
So when you were 23, you were looking and watching George Lucas and Star Wars and seeing that they didn't have the technology.
No, I did that long before. I did that when I was like 15 years old. I was really into the building the models, that they sold at the hobby shops, like the X-Wing models and all that stuff, and I was very, very interested. I always painted pictures of them at the end and did all these cool scenes and things and so on. And I did that long before that. So that was sort of the one of the starting points for the calculations. And so I finished the calculations around 16 years old.
How old were you?
Around 16.
16 years old when you built this framework?
Yeah. I finished it at the first year, or just in August of when I was going into grade 12. So I kind of made a conscious choice at that point to stop thinking about this stuff because I needed to take care of other things in my life for a while. And I figured it was a good enough framework at the time so I could just keep going and use that framework whenever I saw another UFO case or something. Then I could just sort of filter that through that and see if it was the case I was looking for or not really quickly, instead of having to go through it, all the details and all that kind of stuff again and again and again and again with each case. So
you had this framework and you were looking at these cases, and then when you were about 20-some years old, you discovered the Meier case and said, whoa, this matches.
Yeah. Well, actually, by that point, I'd stopped completely looking at UFO cases. I was talking with my uncle a bit and over the phone sometimes, and he would tell me about different things in life, and we would just talk about this and that and, do some problem solving and whatever. And I just sort of mentioned UFO things during one of our phone calls, and he mentioned the Billy Meier case. And he didn't know anything about the information in the case. He only knew about the UFO aspect of it, like the UFO research, and because he'd seen it in 1989 or something. And so he told me that it was hands down the most impressive UFO case he'd ever seen. And he told me it was in Switzerland, and I was like, oh. Switzerland, okay, well, whatever, I'll look into it. And that's the only reason I said I would look into it, was because of the framework was already built. And if the year 1975 matched and many other things, then I would probably have found the case that I was looking for, because it was, I knew in the Contact movie, the first one that they made in 1978, they said that the contacts had started in 1975, but it was actually, that's the year when they took it public. Of course, Billy would have had to have started the contacts when he was like 5 years old,
right,
being educated, growing up, and so on. So that point confused me for a while. I looked into it for another 3 months after I watched that, and concluded that, yeah, this is the case I was looking for. So,
Interesting.
Yeah.
Let me read something from your framework here.
Sure.
It says, most of the world's population lives in cities. Few people even see a clear night sky in their entire lifetimes anymore. This is why our cities and people living in them are not in harmony or balance with the rest of the world anymore. A world which contains within it the entire rest of the universe. City limits have turned into a virtual wall, cutting us off from the rest of the universe, substituting the true meaning of life with a bubble that we live in, perpetuated only by an endless loop of empty, worthless materialism and entertainment for its own sake. I thought that was so profound. Can you elaborate on that at all?
Yeah, well, I grew up, in a place that's, twice the size of the UK, and it's only got 35,000 people in it. So what more do you need, right? Whenever I went to Vancouver and looked down on the jet, from the window, I was thinking, holy crap, the rest of the world is like this. Like, how can they possibly have any meaning in life in a profound connection with nature if they're so tied into these cities? And every time I met these families and things that were living in these places, it just felt like they were so busy and so busy trying to pay their bills and all this stuff and on and on and on, that I just thought, man, oh man, our world, this is a small city. Like, Vancouver is small compared to many cities in this world. And I just thought, oh man, our world is screwed. If this many people are completely ignorant to the laws of nature. We actually brought up, somebody invited a classroom of kids from Vancouver to come up to our place last year. And we did a little tour for them around our place, and we have a teepee and a tree house and all this kind of stuff that, every kid sort of dreams about, and I just kind of took for granted again when I was young, because I thought all kids, lived like that. And they were blown away. And I thought, that is so sad. These kids will never, if ever, experience anything like this. If they do, I hope they do, they have to go out of the city limits. They have to plan a whole trip to go and do it. They have to go at great expense, and set up, some tent somewhere, expensive thing, to stay in a campground, and it's crowded with people again, and all this kind of stuff, and blah, 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 and be afraid of, is there a cougar or is there a bear or what do we do, and all this kind of stuff, being completely ignorant about any of that stuff. And, I grew up in a place where people go hunting. It's part of the culture. It's, there's a lot of native culture here and so on. It's very much rooted in this place where I'm living and where I grew up. And the natives are very much connected to the land and so on, and at least many of them are. And it's a big part of the culture here. When I was growing up here, people would, you can't do this anymore, which is very sad, and this changed in my lifetime. But people would basically look for a place in the bush. They would build a cabin, and they would live there for the rest of their life. They wouldn't even have to buy the property sometimes, or if they did, it was, but you can't do that anymore. They would drink the water right out of the lake. They would, everything. They would get a moose once a year, and then they would have meat in their freezer for the rest of the year. And now a property here is, $500,000, $600,000, $1 million. That changed in my lifetime. You can't do that anymore, and it's so sad. Like, when you see a world where it's very low population and not much development, you see a world of opportunity, of abundance. Everyone has the opportunity to be, because they're not so busy freaking paying bills all the time. They're not always owing somebody for the rest of their life. That is so sad, seeing that thing, that development in my lifetime. That is probably, for me, the saddest thing I've seen in my lifetime. That change in my home, and seeing the whole rest of the world live like that. It is disgusting. It is so sad, because it totally disconnects you from reality. Totally. You have no connection to it anymore because you're always in the back of your mind, oh, there's, this I'm worried about, and you're always biting your fingernails, and are you going to make it, and all this kind of stuff. I mean, geez, it's ridiculous. What a stupid world we've built ourselves. It is pathetic. It is really pathetic. I'm sorry. It is really stupid. So, I don't know. When I hear the whole thing like, oh, we're not overpopulated, I'm sorry. You've never grown up in a place that is very low population. You don't know the benefits. You don't. You can't know it if you haven't seen it.
I was working out in the gym today, and it's an unusual gym. It's kind of, you can go there and they have a little key you can swipe, and sometimes they go in later than most of the people, and there's no one, a lot of times not very many people in there. And of course they have this loud music, this heavy metal music. And I was thinking about it, and I was thinking, this is a kind of reflection of the city itself. The sounds of machines, the screaming of the singers, it's much like the sounds of humanity in the city. That's where this comes from.
Yes. There's a lot of suffering. There's a lot of suffering. And, people look at the developing world like, ooh, like snubbed our nose to them, but really, I'm sorry. I don't know. Like, of course, Switzerland has certainly a lot to be said for its social structures and so on and so forth, and that's wonderful. They have healthcare, they have, free education past, post-secondary and so on, and they can go back as many times as they like, and keep developing their skills, and they start their skills early and in real world skills, not just, reading book skills, but actual skills. And so on and so forth. And I think that's wonderful. But you can get those skills growing up in the wilderness. You can learn how to build. You can learn how to do basic architecture. You can do. I learned music. I learned art. I did all of these things very profoundly, and it's again, stick to the basics, right? When you go outdoors, you prepare, and if you don't respect what Mother Nature is telling you, guess what? Mother Nature doesn't care. It's just going to kill you. So
I wanted to talk about that because that's one of the things in your framework that I highlighted, that Mother Nature will just kill you. Can you elaborate on that? Doesn't care.
Of course it doesn't care. I mean, it's, like, it on the
neutral.
one hand, what's that?
It's neutral, right? It just
exactly. It's neutral. So there's no, like, if you use it properly, it will reward you. Like, if you say 2 + 2 = 4, then you get 2 bananas plus 2 apples is, 4 pieces of fruit. Great, right? So, like, or if you build an architectural, if you use it in architecture, the basics, you stick to the basics again, then you have a foundation that's not going to collapse in on itself, and you can build whatever you want, really, after that, if it's properly built. And so it's just, you have to realize that if you try to skip steps, or if you think you're, too good for that, or, whatever, if you think you're a big smarty and you're going to go out there in -30 below and just wear, jeans and a jacket and no hat and no gloves, well, guess what? You're going to freeze your fingers off. Is it so complicated? But people still do it. And, they go out skidooing. They go out on their skidoo and their snow machine for like 20 miles, and then they break down, and then they have to walk all the way back in the cold. I mean, hello, what did you think was going to happen? Like, this is, this isn't a Walt Disney movie. You don't just get, happy endings all the time. So,
I like that. Yeah, let me read something from one of Billy's books that kind of goes right along with what you're saying. The book is called The Way to Live. It says here on page 28, truly whoever always hangs around beyond his own house becomes the stranger in his or her own home and in his or her own family. Precisely that happens when he or she who constantly lives only in distraction hangs around in discos, bars, hotels, and amusement parlors. He/she becomes a stranger to him/herself, foreign in his or her reflecting and striving, foreign in his or her consciousness, and foreign in all his or her thinking, feeling, and actions. So basically, that's what people are experiencing, living this lifestyle in the city. That's basically what you saw, right?
Yes, absolutely. And so it's, when you grow up in nature, and I really mean in nature, like, you look out the window and there's nothing for the next, 2,000 kilometers, that kind of nature, no roads, no houses, no nothing. That humbles you in a sense that, you realize that, hey, there's something bigger than me, and I better pay attention to that. Because if I don't, guess what? And we're seeing that with climate change. We're seeing that with all the pollution and the stupidity that's done over greed and whatever. Like it just never ends, right? Like, so I don't know. Yeah, it just seems there's a lot of disconnect. I mean, a lot, and it's just so sad to see. It's really sad to see what people will do for $1, or for $1 million or whatever it might be. I mean, I don't care. It's just so useless, Just growing up in a place where you have abundance just by itself. You don't need $1 million to have a better view than some billionaire in New York, right? So, I mean, it's just ridiculous. The whole thing is just ridiculous, and people fall for it. They believe it, and they think it's okay. They think that's the way that life is, and I shake my head every time.
Yeah, the whole world is on the wrong path, which is pretty shocking sometimes. You talk about the public being under the grip of power monopolies.
Oh yeah, are they? Didn't we see that with his last election and every other election before it, and on and on and on? I mean, you look at the news again for another 10 seconds and you realize, there are certainly groups out there trying to retain their power by saying very stupid things. They're getting away with it. Well, less and less, hopefully, but they are still getting away with it. And yeah.
Do you think that a part of the public now is mind controlled at some level?
Oh, goodness. I mean, if people really buy into this whole, materialistic framework, I guess, that we've built for ourselves, whether it be in the form of religious, whatever this, looking for money, or whatever, it might be corporations looking for money, or it might be governments looking for money, or whatever, whoever is looking for, to profit at the expense of somebody else, at somebody else's ignorance. Yeah, of course. I mean, look at, again, the last election, like WikiLeaks, thank goodness, they exist, and they certainly are very helpful in providing information.
The Meier material, if you remember, Contact 251 talks about the rise of the robot people. Yeah. Do you see our society moving that way? I mean, people's addiction to cell phones, even our addiction to the personal computers. People, yeah. I mean, it's people's, like, you probably have such a unique perspective because you have lived truly in the deep wooded areas your whole life, isolated. Yeah. And that I think is a really interesting advantage.
It is, and especially in such a harsh climate, because I mean, sorry, I'm trying. I was going to say something. I forget what it was, but yeah.
Well,
I mean,
I brought up the rise of the robot people.
Oh yes, right. I mean, to this day, I still don't own a cell phone. When I go out in nature, I want to be alone. I don't want anybody. I don't even want a temptation to look at some stupid screen saying, "Oh, that's lovely," Like, get away from me with that garbage. Get away. Like, it's just so useless. And so, yeah, no, I certainly see that. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people, even in my own circles, that that they're constantly glued to their phones and stuff, and there's people looking for Pokemon and all this garbage, and still not understanding how that serves the greater intelligence agency world. They're saying, oh well, I didn't do anything wrong, so they're not going to come after me. Well, I'm sorry, that's not how it works. They don't care if you did anything wrong. They're just going to take your money.
No, they're after everybody. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I don't know. I guess, certainly there's a lot of that going on. I don't have a TV. I stay away from that stuff, and I try and do as many real things with my hands as I can. So, music, art, carpentry, just basic work with my hands all day long as much as I can, and I think at the center, they try to provide that opportunity for people too, because there's a lot of value in physical work, and I can attest to that on my own, and because you get to think while you're working, and you discover things while you're doing things like that too, and you realize that there is an objective reality you have to not ignore. And if you do, then you do it at your own peril, that kind of thing. And ignorance is a good thing to have if you're willing to learn, but if you're not willing to learn, then good luck. So, yeah.
It's ironic. It seems like if you're, how can I say this? If you're pursuing what's natural, the kinds of things that you're talking about, it leads to more of spiritual internal growth, and that's the kind of person that would probably benefit from technology the most, or would have the responsibility to use it correctly, maybe, right? Right, yeah. I mean, if you really understand that the whole thing with Mother Nature being neutral, then that affects your spirituality too. You don't end up realizing that, there are these chosen people and all this kind of stuff. No, we're all on equal ground. If some idiot decides to say that 2 + 2 = 3, guess what? He's going to find out he's wrong. So it doesn't matter what country you come from, or what planet you come from, or what religion you come from, or whatever you come from. Doesn't matter how much money you have or anything like that. We still all live by the same laws. Nobody's immune to that. As we're seeing today with all the problems we're having, is the rich people go down with the ship, just like the poor people do. So, so you can have all the money you want in the world, but it ain't gonna save you. It's not gonna. Now how? So how did you progress a little bit? You discovered the Meier case with your framework, and you started reading Billy's books, and you started going to Switzerland. We're kind of running out of time. Can you tell us a little bit about that and where you are now?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's natural tendency, I guess, in my personal case anyways, to have an interest in these books and reading as much as I can. I spent a good year and a half or so just reading by myself before talking to anybody associated with FIGU in any way, even on Facebook or anything. I didn't know that there were groups anyway, and I didn't want to pursue them because I just wanted to learn for myself. Mm-hmm. I didn't want anybody's opinion. I didn't want to be tainted by anybody's opinion about it. I didn't need anybody's opinion. I could just do my own measurements and do my own research. So, there, of course, everyone has an opinion, and especially something this volatile and this much dead against, all these power groups and so forth that are trying to take control or keep control at least. It's much more worthwhile.
I'm sorry to derail you. Let me throw out another question here. When I was first learning this stuff, did you find yourself, you learn a little bit, and then sometimes, depending on what it was, you kind of go into a little bit of a shock for a little while, and trying to... Please tell us about that.
Oh, well, there are certain things that I really did learn that were somewhat contrary to my views, but not completely. And I mean, actually, to be honest, nothing really surprised me all that much. Nothing really shocked me, but it
wow,
was.
it did me. Goodness.
Yeah, well, I mean, like I said, I had the framework built before, right? And it covers a lot of subjects.
What about the idea? And maybe this didn't shock you at all. Maybe it's just part of my personal experience. What about the whole idea of reincarnation? And
that was the least shocking thing for me. It was
really?
yes, absolutely. That was in my calculations because, like I say, I was not really enjoying life at that point, and I was kind of questioning whether I should stick around for this, what would be a very difficult lifetime. Every day from 9 years old to 21, I was thinking about that and trying to find a good reason.
No, I'm terrible now. I'm sorry about interrupting you again. So, do you think it was part of the difficulty you were having as a young child was that you didn't have all these distractions that people had? You didn't have all the little fluffy things you could play with. So, at a young age, you had to kind of learn to deal with yourself, and
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. I think I went through the same thing. I think I did, but I wasn't in as extreme as isolation as you. So you had to go through this like compressed spiritual growth stage where you develop independent thinking and all these other things. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I had no other choice. I mean, I was completely surrounded by ideas and people that had ideas that were so contradictory in so many ways, and I just thought this cannot work, and this is a contributing factor to our civilization's demise, basically, is these ridiculous ideas that these people had. And I just thought, no, I'm sorry, I can't go that direction. And so yeah, I was utterly completely alone. Like even if there was a few people around me, even if I was going to school or even if I was whatever, I was alone. I was utterly alone, and I had nobody I could talk to about any of this stuff because it was just too sensitive, I guess, for them. I don't know why. I mean, why would you be offended about learning? I mean, how could you be? It's just such a stupid thing and senseless thing to be offended about learning something new. Why? What do you gather? What do you get from that? I mean, it's ridiculous. So, what a stupid thing, So I just conquered my beliefs and my pre-existing views, and I just said, you know what? I'm going to go with what makes the most sense. I don't care what I believe anymore. Like, if it doesn't hurt my feelings to learn something new, and I find, it works for anything that you get into, whether it be in music or art or architecture or learning to drive a car or anything. If you have something that you think in your head that's wrong, it pays to learn past that point and learn some new knowledge that is actually useful, So I was utterly alone. I had no choice but to go through that process. And every single day when I hit rock bottom, and I mean really every single day, I would have to find a reason to keep living. And that's what the calculations from. That's where the calculations came from. So one thought after another, it developed into this framework, and that's kind of what prevented me from doing myself in. So all those years.
So are you saying that part of your when you were trying to make sense of the world, when you were trying to find reason for living or whatever you want to call that your mind went towards more developed societies? I mean, and then you started. See, now this is really interesting. I think that your mind would work that way.
Well, I certainly didn't see our society working well. So, yeah, we needed something new for sure. And I figured it was high time that, it would be a very good time to bring some new information about that. How to structure civilization a little bit more long-lasting and a bit more long-term thinking than what we have now.
So even at 9 or 10 or 11 or 12 years old, you knew that this society was not right.
Oh yeah, by 8 years old, I was saying to my math teachers, "Look, you guys are teaching me multiplication and all this stuff. You guys aren't applying any of this in the real world. All of these problems are going on, and you're not applying any of this basic, stupid math that any little kid can learn. None of these adults were applying it." And I thought, you hypocrites, why are you making my whole education about getting grades, and you're telling me to ignore everything that's really going on in this world? I mean, I just gave up on them as being my teachers. I said, no, you can't be my teachers. And I just dragged my my feet through school. I barely made it, but I didn't care. Like, for me, it was a badge of honor. And I said, no, I can't do this. You guys are just it's a joke. The whole education system, the way it's built, is a joke. It's completely for materialistic reasons only. That's it. For money and materialism. That's the only purpose it has, and it's ridiculous. It's so pathetic. It's sad. So I just said no. Forget it.
I mean, it's so expensive, especially college now. I'm glad I went. I'm glad I went before it got so bad, and now it's ridiculous. You can't even go now. It's just ridiculous. The Meier material talks about the Lyrians and people from other star systems that visited here to the Earth, but that died on the Earth and entered into our reincarnational patterns, which I've always thought is very, very interesting. And how do you think one of these people that died, that lived in a more advanced society, that died in the past, and then reincarnated on the Earth, how do you think he would feel about the society that we have now?
Well, yeah, that's the golden question, isn't it? So it sure gives us a good motivation to want to fix it. I mean, I don't know. Like, even when I was 7 years old, I was already thinking about the religions and stuff, and how much contradiction there was and all that stuff too. And I figured somebody's got to set this straight. Like, that was the thought I had when I was 7. Somebody has to set this straight. A society can't function on these ideas. It's just ridiculous. It's Bronze Age crap. I mean, they don't even tell you how to boil water to kill germs. I mean, how useful is that? I mean, the one thing that could have saved billions of people throughout history, so simple: boil water to kill germs. Oh, well, they didn't mention that. Well, what the hell is the point of this stuff? I mean, come on. I mean,
so you're saying the fact that isn't mentioned in our religious teachings is a testament to how screwed up it is?
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, just look at the people having wars and fighting over it. I mean, I could see on the news, even when I was a little kid, every night at 6:00, when the news would come on, oh, Israel this and then blah, 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 that, and they're all bashing each other's skulls in, and on and on and on it goes. And I'm just like, man, that's not nice. Who wants to live in a world like that? I mean, that's ridiculous. It's just so depressing for a kid growing up, And I just thought, this isn't going to work. This has to change, And so I just started going on that path when I was, a little kid, and I just said, to hell with all this stuff. I basically quit school when I was in grade 3. I mean, I stayed in the school system, but my heart wasn't in it,
Wow. That's pretty
young.
That's pretty young.
Well, yeah, it was really annoying to have to go through all that. And so there's this motivation, too, now to want to live longer, so I don't have to go through the school system anytime soon again, right?
That's so funny.
Yeah, it's
Daniel, we've gone over time. You don't even have. Do you have a website or anything where people could?
No.
No. We have to get your framework online. You're still working on that, right?
Yeah, I'm still working on that. I've been trying to get a hold of Patrick, but he's a hard guy to get a hold of these days. I guess he's doing some courses or something. So, but yeah, we're gonna get that done soon, and I think we're pretty much there now. And then they're gonna translate it into German, so that's a nice thing. I mean, you don't see that too often, I guess, with the English articles and stuff. So it's a nice little honor that I take it as an honor anyway. So.
You know, I printed your framework out, and it's 27 pages.
Oh, well, there you go. It's more than I thought. I thought it was 19 pages. So
well,
there you
it was 27 pages on my paper anyway.
Wow. Okay.
The other thing is, I think we only got through about 4 or 5 pages today in our discussion.
We can do more if you want some other time, anytime you like.
Well, I always appreciate the conversation because I mean, you think a lot like I do. There's at least 2 of us in the world.
Yeah. Well, that was
the
motivation.
I went through the same things, the same things when I was a kid. It's really, really funny. And there's probably a lot more people. There's probably a lot more people out there that feel like you too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, look at the suicide rate, right? You don't have to look too hard. I mean, the drug addiction rates and all that stuff. It's telling, that the directions we have spiritually and related to our consciousness development is very weak on this planet as it stands today. And there's very little care in our leaders about that. And it all seems to be about materialism and garbage stuff that nobody, would dedicate their lives to in their right mind. So yeah, no, I can certainly see that. There's a lot of suffering and pain in our world, and it's very sad, very, very sad. So,
well, Daniel, I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you again. It's always fun. Have a great evening, sir. We'll talk to you later.
Sounds good, man. Okay, talk soon.
Bye-bye.